Judith Deutsch is the president of Science for Peace. She's a member of the steering committee of the Independent Jewish Voices and was a participant in the Gaza Community Mental Health Program of the World Health Organization International Conference, Siege and Mental Health, Walls versus Bridges, at the end of October 2008 in Gaza City and Ramallah. And Judith was active yesterday, too, in the sit-in, I believe, at the Jewish consulate. So, Judith, we're going to start with you, and it's a pleasure. Thank you.
I am a Canadian Jewish health professional, appalled by the ever-worsening treatment of the people of Gaza. The words "never again," so fraught with memories of the Holocaust, means never again for all peoples. Richard Falk, UN Special Rapporteur for Human Rights in occupied Palestinian territory, and himself a Jew, said that it is not inappropriate to suggest that this pattern of conduct in Gaza is a Holocaust in the making. Richard Falk continues that his is a desperate appeal to the governments of the world and to international public opinion to act urgently to prevent these current genocidal tendencies from culminating in a collective tragedy. I just read this morning that 1/3 of the casualties in Gaza are children. Here in Canada, similar to the United States and Europe, there is a news blackout about the Jewish opposition to Israel's egregious persecution of the Palestinian people and to the voices of Palestinians themselves. Silencing our voices means silencing the facts about past and present. Silence means that the Palestinians are not empathized with as individual people. Silence means complicity in mass murder and in the mass deception that Israel is a victim, even though Israel has the 4th largest military in the world and has the 3rd largest nuclear arsenal, and is now using cluster bombs and phosphorus shells in Gaza and possibly depleted uranium. Gideon Levy, the eloquent Haaretz columnist, calls Israel the bully of the Middle East. Silence means ignorance about the devastating blockade that began in earnest in 2006. When Hamas was elected in early 2006, James Wolfensohn, Jewish, former president of the World Bank and U.S. Special Envoy to Gaza, warned that the new unity government needed to be supported. He stated that, quote, "the collapse of health services in the education system, which addresses the needs of 1 million children, would be a total failure for the new government and would have tragic consequences for the Palestinian people. This should not be permitted under any circumstances," he said. Canada was the first government to withdraw support. It is so tempting to forget about Canadian complicity in this crime of crippling an entire society. Even before this invasion of December 2000, beginning on December 27, 2008, 85% of Gaza's 1.5 million people depended on humanitarian aid for securing their basic needs. 80% of the population lived below the poverty line. 70% of infants aged 9 months suffered from anemia. 13% to 15% of Gaza's children are stunted in growth due to malnutrition because of the embargo imposed by the siege. Amnesty International reported that Israel even barred infants from leaving Gaza for life-saving cardiovascular surgery this last October and November during the ceasefire. One of Israel's first acts on December 27th was to destroy the medical supply depot for Shifa Hospital. Physicians for Human Rights Israel describes a nightmare situation of hospitals without power, without basic equipment, without anesthetics. A doctor for Medical Aid for Palestine reports that, quote, "they are drawing blood and there's no alcohol. There's no gauze, so they are using cotton, which sticks to the wounds. Half of the ambulance fleet is non-functioning due to lack of fuel. Helicopters target ambulances and kill medics, and Israel prevents evacuation of the wounded. Foreign medical teams are unable to reach health facilities." Physicians for Human Rights has collected personal testimonies. In one family, 6 members sustained injury. They ranged in age from 3 years old to 80 years old. Because of the damages to their home, the family is now outside in an open area without food, water, light, or heat. The family members cannot move more than several meters from where they are because every movement, even to look for water, is met by artillery fire. The family cannot be evacuated because the army has not allowed evacuation of wounded and trapped victims. Last October, I attended the Gaza Community Mental Health Program World Health Organization Conference on the siege. The building has just suffered extensive damage. Dr. Ayad El-Sarraj, director of the Gaza Mental Health Program, speaks about the constant humiliation of Palestinians at the hands of Israeli soldiers. Almost every Palestinian family has been touched by war, torture, imprisonment. He says, quote, "For many of these children, the most excruciating ordeal was to see their fathers being beaten by Israeli soldiers and not offering any resistance. This is truly a terrifying experience. This will have a lasting impact on any observer, but particularly on children. No wonder the Palestinian child will see his model not in his father, but in that soldier, and no wonder his language will be the language of force, and his toys and games the toys and games of death." Listen to the words of Nurit Peled El-Hanan, whose 13-year-old daughter was killed by a Palestinian suicide bomber. Dr. El-Hanan is a recipient of the Sakharov Peace Prize. She says, quote, "I have never experienced the suffering Palestinian women undergo every day, every hour. I don't know the kind of violence that turns a woman's life into constant hell. This daily physical and mental torture of women who are deprived of their basic human rights and needs of privacy and dignity, women whose homes are broken into at any moment of day and night, who are ordered at a gunpoint to strip naked in front of strangers and their own children." And what of the opposition that is conveniently ignored here? Yesterday I was one of a group of Toronto Jewish women at the Israeli consulate saying "not in our name" to the massacre and siege. Many Jews in all parts of Canada abhor Israel's wars and occupation. Why is it that we do not hear anything of the Israeli opposition? In Israel, the Israeli Committee Against House Demolitions on December 27th stated that, quote, "The responsibility for the suffering, both in Israel and Gaza, rests squarely with successive Israeli governments, Labour, Likud, and Kadima alike. Many have pointed out that both the PLO and Hamas implicitly recognize Israel's right to exist in affirming a two-state solution, but Israel does not reciprocate. 500 Israelis have just called for the international community to demand an immediate ceasefire. They say, as if the occupation was not enough, the brutal ongoing repression of the Palestinian population, the construction of settlements, and the siege of Gaza, now comes the bombardment of the civilian population, men, women, old folks, and children. Israel has returned to openly committing war crimes. There are the 500 Sderot residents who just signed a petition calling for an end to the Israeli operation in Gaza and renewal of dialogue between Israel and Hamas. Why do we never hear about them? I will close by quoting the words of Mustafa Barghouti, Secretary General of the Palestinian National Initiative, who wasn't even accorded the courtesy of meeting anyone in the Canadian government during his last visit here. On December 29th, he wrote of Gaza's Guernica, pointing out that Israel carried out provocative attacks throughout the period of the ceasefire and did not live up to any of its obligations of ending the siege and allowing vital humanitarian aid to resume in Gaza. He states, quote, "There is another reason, beyond the internal politics of Israel, why this attack has been allowed to occur: the complicity and silence of the international community. Israel may be pulling the trigger, ending hundreds, perhaps even thousands of lives this week, but it is the apathy of the world and the inhumane tolerance of Palestinian suffering which allows this to occur. The evil only exists because the good remains silent."
Thank you, Judith.